Okay, right. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this Corbett Network Zoom. We have them once a month, and I'm very happy to introduce Lord John Bird, the founder of Big Issue, who's going to entertain us and tell us all about what he does and how he does it. Over to you, John. John, have you muted yourself?
Hello, my name is John Bird. Thank you for asking me to speak this morning. I describe myself proudly as one of Britain's ex-offenders. Proud not of the fact that when I was a young man and a boy and a teenager that I did wrong, but proud of the fact that there were enough people I met who enabled me to move on away from wrongdoing and fighting in pubs and sleeping rough and getting into trouble and homelessness and all that. And there was enough people who I met who enabled me to do it. Also, I was brought up in the criminal justice system to do with juveniles and young YP, young prisoners. And what was so good about in the old days, and I'm not saying they were glamorous because they weren't, in the old days, if you were a person who needed a bit of education, etc., you often got it. Now, what I know is that it's much, much more difficult to get those escape ladders out. I learned to read and write in a boys' prison at the age of 16 in a very, very small period of about 3 months. And I meet too many people in and out of who've been banged up and who are themselves having had all of the problems of being offenders and being ex-offenders. And a lot of the problems I run into around literacy, social preparation for work, skill enhancement, and things like that. So I think I'm very, very fortunate that I'm such an old git that in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, that the times when I was wrongdoing, I did get the support, and I got the support of Her Majesty's Prison Service, even though that service was not always as nice as you'd think. Places where they would take you and beat you senselessly and urinate on you even in order to prove that they were going to try and change you as a little working class London Irish Catholic boy in the slums of London and make you behave yourself better. Of course, it did the exact opposite. It made me into more of a troubled and violent and aggressive person, which is something I still struggle with. I'm not on any form of medication, but I have to keep well away from drink and all that. I'm telling you a personal story because my ascendancy into the House of Lords has always been me telling people that I had been down a road which often leads to bigger crime or social isolation and all those sorts of problems. And what I'm always trying to prove is that never, ever, ever turn your back on anyone who's been in the grief in their early life because of problems around parenting. My parents were, well, my father in particular was very violent. My parents never paid the rent. We lived in the slums of Notting Hill. And in a way, I was socially prepared to fail. Went to school at 5, came out at the age of 15, unable to do anything other than tell you things that were not relevant to the world, and not developing any skills around work or around social integration. So anyway, so to me, the big issue today is how do we adjust, how do we turn society more towards seeing people who have been in the grief who have been let down in a sense by the generation before them. Maybe their parents have also been in the grief, and maybe they've been in the grief for many, many generations. How do we break that? And how do we look at what I try and do, which I've tried to do in The Big Issue, is not turn your back on anyone, not say, well, this person is deserving or this person is undeserving, but try and put your arms around as many of them as possible. How do you begin to realize that when somebody has erred and got into trouble, then we as a society must look upon that as an opportunity to turn those people around so that they can start winnowing out, getting out all of the stuff that is that has led them into that situation in the first instance. So as I say, I was born just after the Second World War. Homeless at 5, homeless at 6, homeless at 7, put into a Catholic orphanage in North London, went in a relatively tame little boy, came out an absolute screwball at the age of 10, started to shoplift, started to steal bikes, started to fight with teachers, started to door messages, started fires and all sorts of stuff. And that was because I was socially being prepared, social engineering, so that John Anthony Bird would end up in the grief. And I am very, very committed to the idea, as I said earlier, that we have to put our arms around people like the little John Bird and lead them out of temptation and lead them into social opportunities. The problem is, of course, that there are so many things that stop somebody reintegrating back into society. And the reason for that, we know, is because the prison population is often, when they come out, they are ill prepared for the lives that they need to lead. So, for instance, if you look at The Big Issue, I'll just give you a little example. Down in Cardiff, our office is a couple of 100 yards from the local prison. And when people come out of prison, we encourage them to come in and talk to us. We encourage them if they want to sell The Big Issue, because The Big Issue is an acceptable way of making money that doesn't get you into trouble. And I started it, in fact, in 1991, very, very much based on my own experience, that once I was getting my hands on legitimate money, I could then start beginning to change my life. About a month or 6 weeks before people leave the Cardiff prison, we go in and we try and help people so that when they come out, obviously the COVID has changed this completely, and we try and support people so that when they get out, they're not on their own. They're not entirely on their own, but they have some kind of support mechanism. So in a way, my life history, and I'm kind of galloping through it because I think I've only got about 15 minutes. What I'm trying to do is just to remind people again and again and again that human beings are so wonderful in being able to bounce back, to become more resilient, to become people who are more useful to themselves and the community that we live in. But there are these impediments, and the impediments, I have to say, are not very, very encouraging.
John, can you hear me? John, you don't have 50 minutes. Please go on. This is absolutely riveting. Just forget and on.
Yeah, my problem is I also have to be in the House of Lords in a few hours because I've got a debate about young children and the grief that they go through. So my time is not mine at the moment. So anyway, I'm bouncing all over the place. So let me just give you a kind of an overall thing. So what we've got is a kind of weird situation, and I think this is a change, and maybe the criminologists amongst us will say, no, John Bird, you got it wrong. But there was a time when people went into the prison service and they were supported and they were encouraged. And you often meet police officers, prison officers, and you often meet governors, and I've met them in the past, who are there to help people when they're in grief. But the problem is that lots of governors and lots of systems are all about security, security, security. About 10 years ago, I was asked to speak at the governors' convention, or whatever it was, the conference of all the leading governors in the UK. And I went up there. And I was there really for something very, very simple. I wanted to ask them some questions. And they just wanted to, I suppose they just wanted to have a drink and talk to each other. And the questions I asked them say, look, how many of you have within your top 5 or 10 requirements as governor of a particular prison? Where is rehabilitation in that? Is it in the top 5? Is it in the top 10? And you know what? It was not in the top 5 or the top 10, even in the top 20 almost. It was all sorts of things around security, around making sure that you did not escape, making sure you didn't kill yourself or kill somebody else, and that you didn't in any way injure the staff. So all of these considerations, and when I tried to emphasize that if you have a prison system that is only about custodial, a custodial sentence is simply about taking people out of circulation, then if they go in with problems, they're going to come out with even more problems. The big problem in the prison system is that it, to a large extent, and I don't want to kind of upset people, but my experience in the prison system and my experience as a young man, I was mentally ill. I had problems. I had problems with drinks. I had problems with drugs. I had problems with aggression and all that. So when I look around the prison system and I talk to people, a very, very large proportion of people are not really supposed to be in the prison system. They should actually be somewhere else. Where they should be, of course, is in some kind of hospital environment. In 1986, or was it 87, Margaret Thatcher's government closed down our mental institutions. This was before the big issue, and I was campaigning around social justice, prisons, social justice and homelessness as an individual. I wasn't a member of any group. And I was the kind of person, I put my hand in the air, I said, well, look, you know, if you close down the mental institutions, you know what's going to happen. The streets are going to fill up. The A&E is going to fill up. And also the prison's going to fill up. And if you actually look at that, if you look at the situation that we're in at the moment, we're in at the moment a situation where many, many people in the prison system have drink and drug and mental health problems. And that is not being addressed. So when I was at Walton Jail, which I think now is called Liverpool Jail, to do a talk some years ago, I did suggest, and a number of people looked at it, why can't the prison service, and this may sound very weird to criminologists, why can't it be seen as an extension of the health service? Why is it? You see, I was a very unhealthy person. I don't meet ordinary people in the prison system who don't have a health perspective, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical health. Why can't we actually grow up and say, look, our children come into this world and they come in pure. They have done nothing wrong. If they are born into poverty, if they're born into need, then poverty, some things happen to people in poverty. I don't meet many of the people who come from good homes and good social backgrounds, though I'm told they are there, who end up in the custodial system. When I look at my big issue vendors, I ask, where do they come from? My big issue vendors largely come from the same social group that I come from. And they are the people who have been disenfranchised almost from birth. So they're children who come in. I've never seen a baby with a brick in his hand. I've never seen a young child not being groomed in some ways into social failure through poverty, through a lack of social support, through a lack of education, through a lack of all these opportunities. So my ambitions as a a person who works in Parliament and as a person who runs the big issue. My ambitions are to drive a coach and horses through the kind of thinking that is going on at a particular moment. The idea that you have you have the criminal, you have the justice system, you have the health system, you have the education system, you have the social support system, and all of them have to become, in some senses, one of the same. 70% of all of the activities of both houses of Parliament, whether it's the House, whether it's the Commons, or whether it's the Lords, 70% of the time spent is spent on a number of things to do with poverty. They are all to do with the collateral damage done by poverty. If we want to get rid of prisons, if we want to get rid of custodial sentences, if we want to bring in restorative justice, if the biggest piece of restorative justice is to give our children the chance of growing and not being a part of a failed society that is an inheritance of failure, an inheritance of poverty, an inheritance of all the problems that have been passed down through their generations. At the age of 5, I went to my little local Catholic school. My mum was a devout Catholic, so we went to the local school, and she sent me into school, and all she did say was keep out of trouble. 15 years later, I came out the other end, as I said, unable to read and write. That 10 years later, that 10 years to my parents was babysitting time. All they wanted to do, and I'm not having a go at them, was because this is the way they'd been socially grown and developed, was to get in and out like shit off a shovel, get in and get out, and then get a job on the building site. That was all my mother and father's attitude towards education. So the fact that I couldn't read and write didn't mean anything. That is one of the big problems we've got. We've got parents who don't know, and nobody is there to help them, the enormous significance. If you want to reduce the prison population of the next 5, 10, 15 years, what you do is you support the parents and you incentivize the parents so that their children don't inherit their lack of education, but are given the opportunity to move out of the need to get into trouble or the opportunity to get into trouble. I'm talking in kind of general terms, but back to some very, very simple things. What I'm doing in that, I raised the issue of homelessness and prison. About 53% of the people that I work with have had criminal records. About 75% of the people I work with have had drink and drug problems and depression and all that. And if you look at the A&E departments, you will look and you'll find the people who are in this kind of section of this social group, they're the people who you will find in the A&E department causing enormous problems because no one ever tackles the reasons, the demons that brought them to the streets and brought them to wrongdoing in any way. I'd just like to end on a very simple point, and that is that there are many little practical things that we can do in Parliament. Like, for instance, a third of people who leave prisons on a Friday end up homeless over the weekend. And I put an amendment down to the prison, but the prison and police bill, on the basis that we need to do some very, very practical little things. But the most practical thing that we could do is to ask ministers, and this is what I'm trying to do with my future and my well-being of future generations bill, which is going through the Lords at the moment and is going into the House of Commons probably sometime in November. And it asks very, very simple questions. Why is it that we keep duplicating and replicating social failure that leads to poverty, that leads to crime, that leads to bigotry, leads to all of these problems? Why is it? And one of the reasons is because we do not ever step back and look at what works and what doesn't work. We don't have an overall global concept of government. We have departments. We have one department followed by another. They call it siloization or something like that. And that is one of the major, major problems that we have in the UK and throughout the world today, that we treat crime as crime rather than treating it as a sign, a symbol of something that is failing within society and that causes people to find ways around the fact that they lack opportunity, they lack education, or they lack the chance of moving on and are therefore caught in poverty. So my Future Generations bill is about spend to save. It's about budgeting so that we invest the money right before the problem rather than when the problem happens. What government is very, very good at, and the Treasury is brilliant at, is when there is a problem, they'll spend the money. But they won't spend the money to prevent the problem. So if you went through 2020, as we all did, and the COVID, the government was so incredibly committed to spending money on the emergency. Now, in the period of recovery, we're trying to get into recovery in the year 2021, we have a major problem. They're not making available the money for the recovery. So, for instance, if you look at the amount there's over 500,000 people or families who are behind in their rent or their mortgage, and they are therefore easily evictable. Every 3.5 hours, somebody is being made homeless because they lost their job through COVID-19. Now you imagine what that's going to do to the prison service of a few years' time, or maybe 5 or 10 years' time. So what you've got is you've got mum and dad unable to pay the rent. The child, Charlie and Mary, go off to school and they don't do very well because they're depressed. They've had to declare themselves as homeless. And the local authority, they're put in temporary accommodation. So what happens there? The children start having problems. They start having mental health problems. They start getting disorderly. Some of them will slip into trouble. Some of them will get into grief. Some of them will get into drugs. Some of them will get into drink. And that is one of the biggest social drivers for an increase in the prison population over the next 5 to 10 years. And what is the government doing about it? What the government is doing about it is saying, let's watch and see. We have over 1 million people who were left on the furlough scheme who are now potentially going to lose their jobs. And if a half of them lose their jobs, or those 500,000 people who have not paid their mortgages or their rent and become evicted, then you have an enormous churn of people moving into the prison. I think the prisons are now, I think it's just under 90,000. We could have a situation where that figure could be doubled over the next 5 or 10 years. And that is why it's the thinking that needs to go into looking at that problem. And the thinking has to be getting the government to invest R&D in, not building more prisons, but building more facilities and opportunities so that people don't have to fall into prisons, and looking at restorative justice, looking at all the other things, looking at the idea that we have to start to use psychoanalysis and we have to use those kind of things and find the demons that drive people like me into grief and anger and unhappiness and all the other things that I did. Anyway, I'm going to end on that. I have to say that I was blessed. I'm also a devout ex-Catholic, so I am still blessed. I was blessed by the fact that I got involved in Marxism and politics at the age of 21, and that's what got me out of the grief. That's what got me out, and it got rid of all my racism and all my chauvinism and all my homophobia that I'd had as a young boy. And it was interesting that I went through a period. I'm not recommending you all rush off and join the Marxist movement, but it's just to show that here was something that could take my mind off of what I thought was myself and look at the problems of people around me and try and address their problems. I eventually left the Marxist movement and I became a social entrepreneur, because when I was 21, I met a big-nosed Scotsman in Edinburgh when I was hiding from the police there. And when I re-met him 20 years later, he was a multi-millionaire, and he gave me the money to start the Big Issue. And in fact, it was his idea to bring a street paper from the United States to the UK. I'm not sure whether I've covered everything. I've got a long list of things I should have said, but I haven't mentioned them. I'd like to say that every now and then, some of my greatest moments are when I see police officers talking to my vendors, and I know that that particular vendor will have had trouble. I get a real sense of well-being when I see that. Or when a very large guy jumps into a cab when I'm going to a TV studio, and he says to me, "John Bird, I got kicked out of the army 20 years ago, and I've never, ever been out of prison for longer than 9 months ever since then, until I started selling the Big Issue. And now I sell the Big Issue. I can see my family. I make my own money. I don't get into grief. I don't get into trouble. No one's telling me off. And actually, the people in the neighborhood in which I work respect me." And I tell you what, that can bring tears to a grown man's eyes. The fact that you get that duplicated in the Big Issue. The Big Issue is only one of the many things. NACRO, what a brilliant organization. NACRO has been there for people in grief and in trouble for so long. And I relish the fact that, you know, on occasions we worked in partnership with them. I will end there. Thank you very much.
Well,
and I'm sorry that I've had to gallop along a bit there, but
John, can you stay for some questions?
Is it possible that I could end in course for now?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah, great.
Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to David Aparicio, who's our man for the questions. I just wanted to say that what you have said it resonates so much with me, because I've always said that most people in prison need another facility. And I just want to ask you one question. Have you met Dominic Raab, and will you meet him, and will you put your foot on his chest and let him listen to what you say?
Well, what's so interesting about the well-being of future generations, Bill, is it means I have to meet everybody. I have to meet people in education, and I meet the people in justice. So over the next few months, we are programmed to meet all of the big guys and the cabinet itself, because what it is, it's about reforming. It's reforming government, and it's helping the government to create new government, because it's all based on the laws of unintended consequences, because we are always being bitten in the bum because of poor legislation that was carried out, and the prison system is riddled with poor legislation. And Dominic Raab and other people who we'll be talking about will be raising those questions.
David, can you go on?
Thank you, John, and thank you, Val. Right, so if you've got a question, you can either raise your hand physically and stand with it, sit there with it holding up, or you can use the little reactions icon down the bottom to raise a hand. So please, I hope you've got some questions. Whilst I'm waiting for someone to raise a hand, physically or otherwise, I'll just ask something. John, I was quite touched by your comments with regard to the issues behind the crime, especially the social issues. And it made me remind, I'm a magistrate. And every time I sit in court, I get frustrated, because when someone's in front of me, they walk into court and I can see there's a mental health need, or there's a housing need, or there's an educational need, yeah? But I can't solve those in court. So one of the things we need to be able to do is be able to address the issues, not just about criminal justice and punishment, so that we can actually stop that person coming back. So I agree entirely with what you're saying with regard to that.
A couple of people who want to ask questions.
So
I would agree with that. And you know, the magistrates are, they have certain powers, but they are, to some extent, are on a bit of a treadmill. And I really agree. I mean, I do feel that we are probably somewhere after COVID-19 and after a number of other things, maybe even Brexit, they've all got us thinking deeper and got us thinking, hang on, what is going on? And I think we might be looking towards a period when prevention moves right to the front of health, social justice, education, and all. If we fail 35% of our children at school, and I go into a prison and I ask people to put up their hands who did, who, if I go, go to Pentonville and ask 250 geezers, how did you do at school? If you did well, put your hand up, and about 5 or 6. When you got the failure, those kind of failures, that is social engineering. And it's as refined and as clever as the social engineering that you can offer a child that leads to them getting their levels and getting to the university and getting a posh job. Social engineering, it depends on what the social engineering is. And anyway, thank you for your question.
Thank you, John. Right, yeah. Just to let you know, I'll be coming to you in a moment, Kay, then Stuart, then Andrew, and then Cara. Okay, so Kay, thank you. Ask your question.
Hi, John. Lovely to meet you.
Tell them who you are.
Oh, sorry. Kay Palmer Green. I'm the CEO of North Star Academy Trust. We work with children, primary and secondary, with social, emotional and mental health difficulties. And I've been working with children like these in most of the social demographic areas of poverty, etc. I've been, as I said, working in this area for quite some time, and I have started to work and start a project called Project Stop. And this is based on some research done by some in America and Australia, which is schools to prison pipeline. Now, this is the problem I feel that, and you described it when you talked earlier, is that we're all working in silos. So I contacted the Crime Commissioner, who was very interested in this project. I contacted Social Care, the local authority, the Director of Education, and also the DfE. And every single one were absolutely, they loved this whole idea of working with the families, feeding that through to the education, and then feeding that through to a residential that is stopping children from getting into the prisons in the first place, and working with those families. I can go on and on, but which I won't. But then got these people around the room, and even though they were very interested in the idea and said, that they would love to take it further, funding wasn't an option. And that because we're looking at the whole pie rather than sections of it, it would be asking different departments to put their hand in their pocket to put into it, even though each of the families that we work with are costing the environment about costing the state 250,000 per. My question is, where do I go from now? Because every door that I come to, it's closed, and people are saying it's money.
Well, where I would like you to go is I would like you to touch base with our office and tell us your story and tell us your reflections and help us, because we're building an alliance. The well-being of future generations is about education, and it's about putting all the things together. And as I said earlier, reinventing government. And what we'd like to do is help get you to join our alliance. And this alliance includes people like the World Wildlife Fund. It includes people like, what do they call them? People who care for other people and never get a crack of the whip. The home carers, looking after parents and all that. So there's a group and an association. Because maybe I'm a nutter and I want to change everything all at once. But when I saw when I saw the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales, what they're trying to do is just do one simple thing, and that is prevent. Now, it's a very simple word. It's a very complex achievement. What you've described, and I get it all the time. I get people throwing their arms around me you know, and say, John, you're coming up with this idea of prevention. I agreed with it, but I haven't got any money from my department. And I don't know anybody who's got any money because all the money is already allocated and it's spent. It's allocated to emergency. It's allocated to failure once it has happened. It is an ambulance at the bottom of a cliff and not a fence at the top of the cliff. So that is the thinking. The more people like you, Gemma, is it? Sorry, Gemma?
It's Kay Palmer Green.
Kay. Sorry, I was looking.
That's okay, that's fine.
Yeah, Kay. The more people like you and me rattling their cage and saying, look, you have got your head somewhere dark if you think you can run the next 25 years on the basis of emergency budgets and not on prevention budgets. The emergency budget, which is the criminal justice system, it's an emergency. Somebody does wrong on the streets or in the shop or somewhere in the home. Somebody comes up to them, cops hold of them, takes them into court. Emergency, 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 emergency. And then they come out at the other end in another emergency because they haven't got enough money or social opportunities. They've broken their relationships with their family and they pass then into another emergency, which actually might go on for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely.
That is the real, and you and I and people like us, and that's why the Wellbeing of Future Generations Bill is going through the House of Lords. Simon Fell, who is a Conservative MP from the north of England, is taking it through the Commons. We've got loads of support, but what we need is this government to stop saying that emergency responses are enough.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll be in.
Can we ask people to be very succinct? We've only got a very short time with John. So can you please be succinct and David, over to you.
Stuart, could you ask your question, please? Please unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, John, thank you so much. Your passion is almost like I feel like I want to get out there today and campaign myself. It's amazing just to listen to you. As somebody who has spent time in the prison that you describe in Walton, not as a visitor but as a resident, it's really everything you were saying really imparted to me what I've kind of been working toward for the last maybe 10 years, trying to help people who are suffering multiple deprivations, not just in one area but multiply across all of the kind of the sectors, all the commonly housing, finance, the benefit, debt, all that kind of stuff. And what I've realized listening to you is what I've been doing for the last 10 years is focusing on the behavior, focusing on the emergency. And recently my wife and I we've adopted a young boy, and we did that partially because in my job every day I see the need, I see the brokenness in families, and I see if we could just help one young life, then actually that might have a massive difference in the future. And just listening to you, it kind of makes me feel really emotional, but also really pertinent. The fact is, we can throw all the money we want at the emergency, and we can throw all the resource we can at the problem. But actually, if we don't direct that to the family, and we don't direct that to the problem before it becomes a problem, we are pissing in the wind, mind my French, because we will always have those problems that will keep coming back because we've not dealt with the issue, which you use the word poverty, and it is true, poverty, whether that's financial, food, whatever that may be. I think we are starting to come to a point where we need to think about that less than a silo together. So my point is, does the bill cover, for me it's a personal question, but does the bill cover looked after children? Does it cover broken families in that way, where we are actually kind of, if we can look at the brokenness before it becomes brokenness? I think the statistic I heard recently was 60% your adults in prison often look after children. What are we doing about that?
Stuart, can you pause, please?
Yeah, Stuart. Thanks. I think Stuart's got the end there. Thank you, Stuart. That was a brilliant. And likewise, we're all going in the same direction, hopefully. What is interesting about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Bill, and as I say, it's based on the Welsh bill, is that it's about changing the thinking. what you've got to do is change the thing. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a number of people the other day about the fact that we may have another couple of 100,000 people, 300,000 people on our streets. And we might have another 300,000 to 400,000 people living in temporary accommodation. And what they said to me was really so clear. They said, you know what? We could get rid of rough sleeping in the next 10 years if we did a number of things. And they went on about rough sleeping and all that. And I said, look, hang on. Look, since I started the big issue 30 years ago, I've been working with an average of 15 to 17,000 homeless people a year. Now, I'm not saying it's not important to get rid of rough sleeping or to get rid of the homelessness that is there already. But I said, I think the real big problem now is that we're going to have hundreds of thousands of people. And a lot of those are going to end up in the prison system. And you know, I couldn't get them to actually think about prevention. All I could get them to think about, all they could think about, and I'm not slagging them off because they're wonderful people. All they could think about was clever ways of coming up with another initiative that would help. And I'm saying, no. Unless we are thinking prevention, unless we say, let's have a prevention convention rather than just to begin with, that's what I've been advocating. A prevention convention. How could we prevent people ending up in prison? How could we prevent people ending up in hospital? How could we prevent people eating such poor food that it affects their health because they themselves, how can we prevent that? People don't ask those questions. So to me, when you say, is it about children? The well-being of future generations is the well-being of people who have yet to be born, yet to be conceived, and even yet to meet each other to begin the process. So if we don't centralize prevention, then we're lost. When I was born, just after the Second World War, they brought in the welfare state when I was 2. In those days, there wasn't a lot of money around. So what did they do? They had public medicine. And public medicine, which has virtually disappeared, was where they would come into our school, you know, paramedics or whatever you call it, or whatever, and they'd give us the exercises. We'd be doing the exercises. They'd give us cod liver oil. They'd give us milk. They'd give us water. They would talk to us about doing things about not smoking. We were 5 and 6, and we were doing all these exercises and the thing was, even though we were living in the slums of Notting Hill, they realized that it was much better to prevent than to actually mend. Unfortunately, all of that has disappeared because as we have become more consumers, now we expect the doctor to sort us out. And there is a major change. I am one of those persons who learned to jump around, even though I'm a 75-year-old git. I'm always on the bike, I'm always moving, I'm always walking and all sorts of things because I'm doing all those silly little things. I still do them. I still do that stuff. And that is because I remember those lessons in those early days. Unfortunately, if you don't look after yourself, you do get ill. And that is prevention. And in my opinion, until we make the next government or this government a prevention government, we're going nowhere.
David, you've got to unmute yourself.
Oh.
Sorry, Andrew, can I ask you to ask your question? We're running out of time, so can you make it really brief? Introduce yourself,
yeah,
and ask your question directly.
Hi, John.
Hello there.
Yeah, thank you. It was real inspiration, as I said, hearing your story. Just two really kind of two simple things, because I've got, you know, substantial lived experience and I've been through all the systems you said and sort of beyond those in the prison system, you know. But two things have always baffled me. Number one, it's when young people get into trouble, you know, for the first time, stealing a car, things like this. I've always been baffled. The yachts team will get involved and, you know, they'll try to sort of, you know, hold them out and do certain things. I think, why don't we have foresight to put those kids to work into a garage, where someone's struggling in a community to just, to keep their business sustained, give them some money basically to be a mentor for that young person and give that person what their passion is, try to at least channel what they've actually done, but in a positive way, and look at that avenue. The second avenue, I work a lot in the community with the gangs and in the prisons as well, particularly around postcodes. And a lot of these things do come from positivity, where a young person from the age of, 11, 12 years old, their friends are getting, they're entitled to school dinners, but, their friends are going to the chicken shop. They want to go to the chicken shop like their friends are going to the chicken shop. Someone's there to pick them up and give them £5 on the first day to buy 2 pieces of chicken and chips. They're there the second day, the third day, the fourth day. This goes on for a week. This goes to 2 weeks. Suddenly they're approached and said, you owe me £50. They can't go and tell their mum that they've just taken £15 from a stranger. They're brought into the whole gang thing. Now, I understand the mechanics of this incredibly well and how the streets are today. And being in the dispersal systems, high securities, the guys who started these kind of initial beefs, who are doing the 50-year to 40-year sentences, I see those guys all sitting together from rival gangs on a food boat where we buy a food and you all cook and you eat together. All those beefs and problems that young kids are killing themselves for today has been squashed. But why don't they give an insight to those people who are in the dispersal prisons to be able to say, this is not real, this is all a lie, as I've done with my life to young people, but give an incentive. I know this is going to outrage some people, but even look at pleas of mercy, where people from day one on these big sentences, where they've still got street credibility, can start to rehabilitate from day one by helping mentors on the outside try to get through to these young people while they're still current and they've still got sway on the streets. Now, that's probably a lot to digest all in sort of one hit, but I'd just like to get your views on those things.
Yeah, well, what I'd say is first of all, the idea of taking children, young people who are nicking, I mean, I was nicking cars and doing all those sorts of things, and getting them where their passion was. I've done it with my own son. My own son is a Formula One nutter, and I've got him going towards that rather than doing things that he doesn't want to do at school, because I've got a young son, and so those kind of things appealing. What I find so interesting, I mean, there was a mate of mine who got banged up, well, more like my brother's mate. He got banged up, and the reason he got banged up is because he couldn't get a job, and the reason he couldn't get a job is because he was severely dyslexic, and he became one of the biggest organisers of cocaine coming into this country. He was brilliant. He was a genius. He could have run British Gas. He could have run British Telecom. But there were these impediments, class impediments, because he didn't talk well and all that stuff. So there is a lot of imagination and cleverness to be found in people who are banged up. I mean, I would love the idea. I'd love to talk to you more, and I would love you to contact our office, because you're the kind of person who should be helping us with our Future Generations bill, because it's about, actually, as I said, prevention. You talk about the gangs and all that sort of stuff. I was in San Quentin. I worked in America for a while, and I was in San Quentin, and it was so interesting. I couldn't get these 99 guys, big geezers, to listen to what I said. So I said something which I don't know if you get away with it now. I said, well, I'm going. I come from England. You don't want to talk to me. I said, you're all a bunch of scum. And suddenly they all kind of woke up, and there were deputies around getting their rifles out, because they thought, hang on, this guy obviously is here to commit suicide. And I said, but you know what? You're not ordinary scum. You cost the state $70,000 a year to keep you in here, unless you're a bad boy, and it's probably double that. Wouldn't it be great the next time you rob the corner shop with your Saturday night special, which is what they were all doing at the time, 25 years ago? Wouldn't it be wonderful if the judge said, you will be taken from here and taken to a place where you will open an auto repair shop. They're all mad about cars. That idea. And what was so interesting, they wouldn't let me go because they were being inspired by the fact that actually there was other ways of doing it. And they were all in the gangs. I mean, San Quentin is one of the nastiest prisons that you got in the States. And they were all people who had been banged up and done wrong. And some of them were getting out and all that. But what they really needed, they needed the inspiration, in my opinion, that they weren't all people to be thrown away. And I think that the fact that somebody who has been a bad boy can become the prodigal son and can go in and talk to people in a way that nobody else. I mean, I'm quite good at talking to people who are banged up at the moment, but there are people who've had deeper experiences than me who need to be given that chance. And a lot of them are still in grief. That mate of mine is my brother's mate. He's back inside. He's doing all sorts of things. He's keeping people from committing suicide. And he's a person who everybody had written off as a person who's an evil, genius or something. But I can see what you mean. Sorry, I've got to go now because the House of Lords calls.
John, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
And
just
Carla.
let me ask you one question. Would you send me, would you email me the details about your office in Cardiff? Because I will send that to the people that you said you would like to get in touch with. Would that be a good idea?
Good idea. Also, I'd like people to touch base with our office. And if you want to join our alliance is open to anybody who wants to be constructive around prevention and how and actually getting emergency that works. The big problem, as I think your colleague said earlier, Stuart, big problem is the emergency doesn't often work, but good emergency is brilliant. It's brilliant. Emergency stabilization on the road to the cure. Anyway, I've greatly enjoyed this.
Thank you very much, John. It's been a real pleasure, and you've energized us. And I thank you so much for giving up your valuable time. And good luck for Bill. I look forward.
Thank you very much.
Getting on.
I'll keep you informed.
Oh yes,
right.
do. Please.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, I think that was really special. I'm sorry we didn't get to the other two people who were. I'm just going to give it on the speaker thing. Yes, I'm just sorry that we didn't get to the people who wanted to ask questions, but I think we all agreed, do we not, that was rather special. And that's one of the perks of being a member of the Corbett Network. We've got another Zoom for you next month, but I'm afraid I've forgotten who it is, but it's also somebody who's obviously very much at the top of his profession in the prison reform sector. So I will say goodbye to you and hope to see you again in November. Thank you for coming, and thank you for all the new people who have just joined, and we hope to see you again. Okay, bye-bye.